So today I wanted to talk about Kenya's foreign policy and whether leaning to the West with countries like the United States and the UK is more beneficial for the country than leaning to the East with other countries like China and Middle Eastern countries. In my opinion, both of them are exploitative, and both sides don't have Kenya's best interests first. So I would prefer a scenario where Kenya is independent in many different areas and only engages with other countries in foreign related matters whenever we have to be directly involved. And I'm also going to explain to you how both sides try to influence their power through different means. So, the first thing that I went and searched up was, is Kenya more aligned with the West or the East? And what I got is Kenya maintains a balanced foreign policy, but in practice, it is currently more aligned with the West, particularly the United States and European Union, although it does engage with China and other Eastern powers for strategic and economic reasons. Now, let's first go into how Kenya engages with the West. When you look at a lot of the influence that the West has within Kenya, it would be one, militarily, and then there's also diplomatic, and then there's also trade agreements. But a lot of Western influence around the world is usually soft power through different organizations like the IMF. They usually come with a lot of stipulations whenever these poorer countries or developing nations are looking to get a loan. So what happens is, let's say Kenya wants to go and get an IMF loan. The IMF will look at Kenya's books and um, all the different points within our economy, and then they will make their own decision and say, hey, in order for us to give you this $1 or $2 billion, what you guys will have to do is take off these levies on this product or take off these what's it called, supplementary government aid with in your oil or in your gas. You guys get the point. They try to influence what they want done based on their preferences and what benefits them at the end of the day. And what happens with the eastern side of things, it's usually around infrastructure. But before we get to the east, let's continue down other ways that America influences. So one is military. The military is quite a large sector of the U.S. Economy. A lot of people don't know this, but the U.S. military industrial complex, I think every year the current amount that the U.S. spends on military is, let me see, if I'm correct, it's around like close to a trillion. It is $895 billion. I think that was the last count. That's a huge number. A country like Kenya has a GDP of around like 100 and I think 5 to 120, somewhere within that range. And the US is spending on its own close to a trillion on just military. Now, Kenya has two foreign military bases. How do I feel about these bases? I'm personally, um, I understand their need because they're primarily focused on fighting Al Shabaab and other terrorist threats that come from Somalia and other regions around there. Now, while that is helpful, I question and I'm like, is that not something that Kenya can do on its own? I am a more hyper independent person, right? Ever since I was like probably 13, 14, I never liked relying on people for anything. I never liked the idea of I want to do something, but somebody can tell you no halfway because you're dependent on them. I didn't like that. So when I observe how I would prefer Kenya to operate, I would prefer the same thing. I would prefer Kenya to be able to do what it wants when it wants without anybody influencing or stopping them. Now, the US is not necessarily stopping Kenya from doing anything with the bases, but when you think about like just let's talk about dignity. Like I personally think, I'm like, how independent are we if we can't protect our own borders? Um, how can you have as much pride in your own military if you have to bring in somebody else to help protect you guys? I don't feel like that's being protected. I don't feel like I would have confidence in the Kenyan military if they can't do these things on their own. Now, I'm realistic. We don't have the same, what's it called? We don't have the same military budget as the US. Like I just said, Kenya has a total GDP total of around 100 and like 10 to 120 something. Meanwhile, the US spends close to a trillion, 890, what was the number? 895 billion just on the military. So while they do help us with the Al Shabaab issues, the US is also known to do shady things and operate un in ways that aren't looked upon good. The U.S. has a history of dealing with different regimes that they would obviously look at and say that this is not a democracy. But if they fulfill the interests of the U.S. has no problem dealing with a dictator. They have no problem dealing with a coup leader or even setting up coups. They've set up many coups around the world. So sometimes I question myself and I'm like, okay, when the U.S. goes into these developing nations to help, I sometimes ask myself, I'm like, how much influence do they have on the other side? Could this be a way to almost extort you to like we're gonna make sure that as long as we're here, Al Shabaab doesn't do anything. But if you kick us out, not saying that we're involved, but your terrorist threats might start going up. So there's a lot of different ways to look at that in the sense of like, is the US involved on both sides or are they truly just on Kenya's side? Now, in addition to that, America has how many military bases around the world? I think the number was like close to 800. Okay, so I'm seeing official larger bases around 128 and then combined and site estimates is like 750. So let's call that 750 to like 800 total bases around the world. That's insane. Earlier, when I said America influences its power around the world through soft and hard power, that's the hard power. The world knowing that there's 800 different places around the world that the US can launch an attack from is constantly putting this threat over you and letting you know that, hey, you mess around and do what we don't want you to do, guess what? We can attack you at any point, this and the other. So that's the hard power. The soft power is the loans that come with all the different stipulations. Now, the U.S. has helped Kenya through U.S. aid for quite a few years. When I did a quick search on this, let me see what I found. Give me 1 second. Okay, so from 2001 through 2024, U.S. aid provided approximately 1.26 trillion Kenyan shillings, about $9.74 billion. So in 23 years, the U.S. has pretty much given Kenya about, what's it called? $10 billion. Let's round it up. So Kenya has received roughly 68% of all U.S. Bilateral aid via U.S. aid from 2001 to 2024. And then let me see how this aid gets broken down into the economy, top sectors and recipients in Kenya. So U.S. aid allocated around 84.1 billion Kenyan shillings or 740 million to 232 organizations in Kenya, spanning health, agriculture, and many other sectors. When they go into the health sector through U.S. aid, they're aiding things like HIV and AIDS and a bunch of different things. They help supplement areas where Kenya can't operate on its own. Now, the reason I'm also against how the U.S. aid operates is because it stifles the country. It makes the country dependent, like we have to constantly suckle on the US. And that's not how you grow a country. Imagine the Kenyan government gets so used to receiving, let's say, $500 million every year that they know goes to the health sector, right? That is not giving the nation any type of security because that means that our health is dependent on money coming from the US. So at any point, if the US decides to cut that aid off, what happens to the health sector? It'll crumble. I'm not for that. Personally, the way that I view those type of aids, even though yes, they are directly helpful when they go to certain places, they keep the country from actually advancing in those areas. And it's the same thing that happens here in the US. You'll see people living in government housing or government assistance for decades. And in my head, as a hyper independent person, I'm like, okay, if someone falls on their feet and they need to get back up, yes, the government should be there to help people get back up, give them a place to stay, help them with food stamps, help them with many different things. But is the goal to keep somebody dependent on you forever? And that's what a lot of people don't understand. These are large economies in the US. You like it's, imagine you'll have somebody who's been living in government housing for 30 years or 20 years. And in my head I'm like that's not progressing. That's just babysitting that person. If this US you truly wanted to see people progress, they would find a way to help class mobility and help these people actually buy a home. Maybe the government housing can have programs where you end up buying your unit so that you're not dependent on the government forever. You buy it from them and they help you get on your feet and keep going. So that's how I view US aid in Kenya, in the sense of like instead of you guys actually building your own health sector and your own agriculture sector, here's what we're going to do. We're going to just give you guys free money every single year, even more than you may need, just so that you guys stay where you're at. Don't actually build the infrastructure. Don't actually set up the right things to make sure that all your farmers can get what's it called, fertilizer and all this stuff. No, 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 no. Just constantly depend on us. And as long as you're depending on us, you do have to listen to the few things that we say. You can't do this here. Oh, your country's protesting against this thing that we want you guys to do. Yeah, make sure that it gets done. It doesn't matter what the population wants. It's what we want. So if you want to keep on getting this money every year for your health sector, for this and that, you're gonna have to listen to what we say. And on top of that, military bases. I explained the military part. We're not as advanced as the US military. We don't even have a budget close to what the US spends. So that I can understand. But at the same time, I still would prefer Kenya to be able to protect itself. When you look at countries around Africa, not every country has foreign military bases. For example, Ethiopia and both Tanzania, our northern and southern neighbor, don't have what's it called? Don't have any foreign military bases, if I'm correct. I'm pretty sure Kenya is capable of handling its own with the proper things put in place and with the government actually trying to advance our military. So I'm gonna pause right there. Let me see if there's anything else I missed out on the US side. Okay, I think I pretty much like summarized it. I'm not gonna make a video way too long, but you get the gist of it. The when Kenya aligns with the West, it's through things like the UN treaties, and all these different things. For example, Haiti. We should not be in Haiti. I will say that again. Kenyan military troops should not be in Haiti right now. That is doing the dirty work of the West for them for some measly 200 and something $1 million that won't even go to those military personnel. It goes to the government pockets, those greedy individuals at the top. There's a word I wanted to call them, but I'm not gonna use profanity on my channel. So you guys see the big picture of how the U.S. and Western foreign policy influences Kenya. And then on the eastern side, where we're talking about China and the Middle East, let me go back to this tab. So Eastern ties, they're notable but secondary to the West. So, like I said, Kenya has a balanced, but we lean way, way, way more towards the West. The eastern part of our foreign policy usually goes around China and the Gulf states slash India. China is a major infrastructure partner, roads, rail, example the SGR, and ports. And then Kenya has significant debt obligations to China through Belt and Road projects. China is a major supplier of goods to Kenya. So you guys are probably not new to the debt crisis that a lot of African countries are going through. And a lot of that is China's way of influence. Instead of China coming and giving you free money, how the U.S. does, the U.S. says, "Here's 500 million for your health sector. Just make sure you do this and don't let your people do A, B, C, D." China comes in and says, "Hey, we're gonna build you a road from Mombasa to Nairobi, but but because you guys don't have the money, we'll also give you the loan, but that loan has to come from, for example, China Exim Bank." So let's just lay this out. I'm coming to give you a road, but you're gonna have to take a loan for this road. But that loan is gonna have to come from one of our banks. Okay? On top of that, what happens is they put other stipulations within those contracts, meaning, let's say 60% of the concrete has to be bought from China, 30% of the steel has to come from China, 22% of the labor has to come from China. So when you think about what's going on, it's basically like China's China's coming in and saying, "We're gonna do everything basically, gonna make sure this gets done, but we're gonna bloat you guys with a bunch of loans because you guys can't do it on your own." And on top of that, what happens is these contracts are between governments, right? So China doesn't care if the country requests more and more money. Let's say the road was going to cost 5 billion, but our greedy politicians want to eat. They want to, fill up their pockets and sleep well at night. What they'll do behind closed doors is agree with China to raise these that 5 billion to, let's say, 5.5 billion, right? And that's where the corruption creeps in. China's like, "Cool, you want more money? We'll give it to you, as long as you guys know it has to be paid back." And that's where we get into these debt traps. So when the countries can't pay back these loans, what happens is either China will take the infrastructure or control the infrastructure. For example, I think, if I'm correct, don't quote me, but Kenyans, if you're watching, our Nairobi Expressway is under management by the Chinese until like for like 20 years or something. And if we fail to pay for the SGR, they have some stipulations where they could take certain things back. Don't quote me, but that is true. That there's definitely stipulations of them controlling if we can't pay and do all this stuff. So when I look at that aspect of it, I'm like, okay, there's no difference in what China is doing compared to the US. At the end of the day, you're going to be in debt to them in some way or another if you're taking an IMF loan with stipulations, or if you're taking a Chinese loan and actually get a road. I would actually prefer the Chinese loans if they were regulated to make sure that people aren't stealing and bloating these prices, because you actually end up with something. With those IMF loans, Lord help us, because what happens once the money hits Kenya, who knows? Who honestly knows what happens once that money hits the country? It goes into 500 different politicians' pockets before it even reaches the actual cost. Maybe this loan was to expand our electricity, and they took a loan for 1 billion. Maybe I can proudly say at least 100 million of that is going to be eaten amongst people and stolen. So the reason I'm against both leaning east or west is because I am a hyper independent person, but I'm also a realist. I don't think that Kenya can do everything. No country in the world does everything on their own. But most countries who've established themselves and advanced, they don't have to sign these unfair contracts and these unfair deals just to progress. And that's where it comes down to our politicians. They don't think long term. They don't think in ways where this loan should actually go towards the infrastructure. That way we don't have to come back for more loans. This loan, if it actually goes to do what it was supposed to do, we won't be back to you asking for more loans. But you know what? They think with their tummies instead of their heads. Um, Overall, let me see if there's anything else I missed. I already explained that Kenya's alignment is overall Western, but we still have Eastern ties. With the Gulf states, there's increasing ties with the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and India, especially in energy, remittance, and trade. And then India is also a growing partner in health and education sector. In summary, political, politically and militarily, Kenya leans west. Economically, it is diversified but increasingly reliant on Western aid, trade, and investment, while still maintaining strategic partnerships with the East, especially China. Kenya's current foreign policy strategy is non aligned but pragmatically pro Western under President Ruto. Don't say pragmatically. We have troops in Haiti. That Haiti was not the concoction or the idea of Kenya. It was not the idea of China. It was the idea of the US. So, you guys let me know in the comments. Do you guys think that the West is better, the East is better, or are you more like Jimmy, where you say both of them are devils? We're just choosing the worst, the better devil. Honestly, I do believe that we don't have to, what's it called, bend a knee to any of these countries if the people at the top actually did what they were supposed to with their positions and with the money that they are given. Overall, I don't think I missed anything. I told you guys the U.S. has a lot of military bases, 800 around the world. That's hard power. Soft power is their IMF loans and UN treaties and UN clauses, things that we have to listen to. And then foreign military bases. Kenya has two of them in the country. We have one in Nanyuki, that's the UK one, and then the US has one in Manda Bay. One other thing you guys should know: China's not looking to throw military bases all around the world. If I'm correct, they only have one, and that's in Djibouti. But the US has almost 800. That tells you a lot. Um, I think that's the end of the video. Let me see if there's anything I missed. $1 trillion military industrial complex, and then US aid. Yeah, covered everything. Overall, while short term and maybe directly, these aids, US aids, and these Chinese loans do help us. Long term, they cripple us. Long term, they make us dependent. We don't need to depend on anyone. I don't think that the basis should be there, but hey, terrorist threats have gone down compared to the past. But still, that's something Kenya should be doing independently. That's the end of this video. You guys let me know in the comment section what you guys think, whether you guys think we should align more with the West or the East or neither. I love y'all, and I will see y'all on the next one. Bye.